Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
Hey listeners, welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. We're talking about a lot of things related to money lately, so this is the perfect subject. How do you know if a company has the money to pay you well as a freelancer? Now, this is kind of a trick question for an episode title because you don't know if a company has the money to pay you, and it's perhaps even the wrong question to ask. In today's episode, I'm going to explore some ways to learn a little bit more about how the company values workers and freelancers. And that's perhaps the more important component rather than do they have the funds to pay you. So you really don't know if a company has and is willing to pay good rates for freelancers because the two things don't always necessarily have to come together. I have worked with companies that have $1 million in revenue who pay top level market rates for their freelancers. I have also worked with multi-billion-dollar companies that pay decent or average or middle of the road rates because it's not just about having access to the money. It's what portion of their budget have they allocated towards marketing or IT or operations or whatever realm you exist in as a freelancer, and how do they value those services? So as an example, with writing, some people don't think writers should be paid more than $50 an hour or 20 cents a word. Regardless of how much money the company brings in, that is their perspective on what it means to pay a freelancer well. And so it doesn't matter if the person making the decisions is working at a company that makes $500,000 or $1 million or $10 million. How much do they value the services, the art, the creativity, the technical aspect of what you provide as a freelancer? So it's a good starting point to make sure that a company has some money to pay you for sure, right? We don't necessarily want to be working with the unfunded startup that's paying you nothing or is offering you exposure or is saying, here, we can give you $25 an hour, but trust me, someday we'll get funding. It's really about how do they value that thing that you are coming to the table with? Are they putting aside enough of their budget to pay well for that? Do they respect what you do? And so let's walk through some of the things that you can do to make sure that you are going into pitching a company, especially with cold pitching, with as much information as possible. Now, one of the reasons that things like this can get so tricky on job boards like Upwork is because the client has to usually enter some type of number value or a range, and it may be a total shot in the dark. But what happens is a lot of freelancers won't respond to that job ad if it says $20 to $40 per hour because they're going, the client is cheap, they don't value what I do, I'm not even going to waste my time or my connects submitting a proposal for that job. However, the client may be willing to pay $60 to $80 per hour. They just don't know that that's what it's going to take for them to get high quality work. So there is a difference between a company having the money and a company having the money and being willing and ready to pay that to you. People have different perceptions of different kinds of skills as well, right? They may be willing to pay $300 an hour for a Facebook ad strategist because they see a potential for tremendous upside there. Or they may be willing to pay more for a sales copywriter because they know that that is a very niched and specific skill. But they may want to pay really cheap rates for virtual assistants or for proofreaders. And so even when they have respect for some freelancers, it doesn't always equate to them respecting what you do. And a lot of times, short of having a conversation with the company, you're not going to get a really good sense of this. But you can do a little bit of sleuthing ahead of time to see if there are red flags that should discourage you from working with the company. So one of the first things I like to do, especially as I am cold pitching someone, is to check their revenue. Now, you can literally just type the company's name and average revenue, average profit, etc., onto Google. The numbers that you get may not be perfect. So if you find something that says, they generate $4 million in revenue, maybe back that up with a little bit of research. See if you can find an interview with the founder talking about how much growth they've experienced, potentially even throwing out actual numbers. Revenue is a very powerful number to look for as opposed to funding. And I'll tell you why. Startups can be very dicey for freelancers to work with. On the one hand, if they have funding, they have money to throw your way, and they may be pouring a lot of it into marketing, especially if that startup doesn't have a CMO or a person who is a co-founder who has experience in marketing. They're going to recognize that's a gap on their team and maybe overpay or overcommit some of their early budget to getting the word out there. But startups can be problematic. And I have other resources. I believe there's a podcast episode about this. Should you work with startups, some of the pros and cons. I have worked with a number of startups in the freelancing space in the last couple of years that were targeting audience members just like you listeners. They're trying to reach other freelancers. It has blown my mind how many of them have folded, like completely shut their doors because it wasn't sustainable and they didn't have the revenue. They had the funding, but they didn't have the revenue. And when the funding ran out and when they no longer were able to afford to pay freelancers or even their employees, many of them folded completely. Some of them will eliminate their marketing department. I have worked with 2 different people at startups where in the last year where they were in charge of the marketing department and the company fired everyone in the marketing department at a moment's notice. So therefore my retainer immediately comes to an end. So even as a freelancer and being someone who has a lot of experience writing for this industry, that can go away very quickly. So funding is helpful, but funding is also a short-term vision because if the company cannot generate the revenue through sales of their product or service, that funding will eventually run out. Those investors will get frustrated. Those investors will pull out. But it is helpful to check their revenue. This is a really good indication of whether or not the company has traction yet. Do they have paying customers? Do they have recurring revenue? Has their concept been validated in some way in the marketplace where there's a reasonable possibility that they really need marketing help and that you're the right person to provide it? So I do like to check revenue numbers so I have an idea. Some people will tell you, oh, don't pitch a company if they're not making $5 million in revenue. I don't think that's necessarily true because you can have a $5 million a year revenue company and want to pay people $30 an hour. So let's talk about some of the other things you can do to see if a company cares about the services that you offer and is willing to pay a good rate for doing it. So now that you've researched their revenue, if you're talking about a startup, check out their funding. Now, funding is not always a guaranteed indication that investors 100% support the business. Sometimes, investors take huge gambles in placing money into companies. And if you've ever watched Shark Tank, you see this, right? You kind of get the sense watching that of every 10 deals the sharks invest in, they're just hoping for a return on even one, right? So they recognize that there's a lot of loss, but it's the possibility of discovering that one company with runaway success. So check out their funding and traction. By traction, I mean things like customer numbers, growth year over year. Are people buying, annual subscriptions with them, making a real commitment to working with that company? Have they had tremendous explosion in terms of employees? Have they brought on a lot of employees? That can be an indication that they do have the money and are willing to invest in talent. It can also be a potential red flag if the company doesn't have traction, but is hiring employees to try to make up that gap. So they're hoping that employees will solve all of the problems that perhaps the co-founders should have. Maybe the co-founders didn't do the right market research. So this is all valuable information for you to know, right? If they have a very limited marketing department, that could be a really clear indication that they need help and that they may only be able to afford a freelancer because they can't pay a full-time rate for someone. So look for their funding and their traction if it's a startup. Once you've looked at the employees, look on LinkedIn. How many actual marketing employees do they have? Match this with what's listed on their website. How many people really work at that company specifically dedicated to marketing? And then you can also see if there's someone who has the job title that would be most similar to what you offer as a freelance service. That doesn't mean you should write the company off if you see someone whose full-time job is listed as, copywriter or graphic design. They may need backup support, but especially if you see job listings or job people in jobs with things like head of marketing, head of content, they may not actually be creating the material that you would be providing as a freelance service provider, but the company recognizes and has put trust in that employee to build their bench of talent, employees wise or freelance wise, as needed. And like I said, I have been that person in the director of marketing role with discretion to hire freelancers and with a decent budget to hire quality freelancers at a company that wasn't making as much money as other places. But they valued, hey, this is really important to us to invest in people who have the right skill set with graphic design or with Google ads or with Amazon ads or content writing for our website. So it really is about that underlying value and whether or not you can kind of connect with the person in that head role where you may be reaching out to pitch your services. So if you find those marketing employees, follow them. Are they posting? Are they being interviewed on podcasts? Are they sharing their own thought leadership? You can learn a lot about their approach to hiring freelancers by keeping all of that in the back of your mind as you move forward. You can learn a tremendous amount about a company and whether or not they value freelancers by following and kind of getting on the radar of these marketing employees. I also encourage you to check out how many job openings they have at any given time. It's helpful for you to see where are they currently investing their efforts in a human resources perspective. Do they appear to be on a heavy hiring spree for operations? Well, it sounds like they have plenty of work going on behind the scenes. And if you're not an operations person and you're a creative, you're that designer, that voiceover artist, that copywriter, that ad specialist, you could really help to support them making a lot of investments in systems and processes, because as those people are getting up to speed and being trained, you can be providing high quality services on the creative side. So look at how many job openings they have, not just to see what they're investing in, but what is the salary they are posting for those job positions. Now, companies can go either way on this. Many job seekers are frustrated that lots of companies don't list a pay range at all. And it is super frustrating as an applicant where you're like, I have no idea if your budget for this role is $40,000 or $85,000, and I don't want to waste my time applying if it's on the lower end. But you can even see in other areas where they have made investments. Do they generally pay their employees very well? Do they generally have higher salaries for people in particular departments? Again, interviews with those founders, insight into the person's business strategy and how they feel about investing in talent, building a team, supporting people. Those can all be great things to bring up in your pitch to the company if you are cold pitching. So you might say, I heard your founder, Jason Smith, interviewed on XYZ podcast. I love that he said that team building is one of the most important components in a remote environment. As a freelancer, blah, 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 blah. So it's a really nice connection point to bring up and show that you have really done your research. Another thing to check is to read Glassdoor reviews. Yes, even of feedback that was provided by employees rather than other freelancers. I will tell you too that as a freelancer, especially if I have a bad experience with a company, I will leave them a review on Glassdoor. I will leave them an anonymous review about what my experience was like, solely so that if another freelancer is Googling that agency or that company, they can have a realistic perspective on what it was like to work for that agency. And that way they can make a really informed decision of, do I want to go down this road? So I go in depth with my reviews. I kind of consider it a kindness to future freelancers. I strongly recommend you do the same, especially if you have a really bad experience with a client. It's a nice way to let other people know what some of the issues are. But even in the Glassdoor reviews that are given by people who are employees who no longer work there, you can learn a lot about the work culture, how they pay, are personalities difficult to work with there? Because you'll see a lot of good information from previous employees who may say things like, management is overbearing or they're too nitpicky. And odds are that if they feel like that with employees, it's not going to be that much different as a freelancer. But again, you're picking up valuable tidbits of information. When I leave reviews as a freelancer for a company, I will call out what their rates were as closely as I can. So in one I recently left, I mentioned how much they paid per article and all of the things they expected you to do over time for that article without raising the rate. And that was not really to give that company that feedback, because I really doubt they're going to incorporate anything different, but it was there so that if another freelancer lands on that agency and has Googled, Glassdoor reviews XYZ company, then they can say, oh, wow, this is someone who worked here relatively recently, somebody who had a bad experience. They're telling me exactly what the rates are. That either does or doesn't work with what I was hoping to earn, and really can help you make a good decision about whether it's worth your time. You can also look for past employment positions that were listed by the company for freelancers. So I guess that was a little confusing. I mean, past positions posted for freelancers or for employees. Sometimes these get deleted off of their website, but if they are not deleted, you can see old job descriptions and get information about what they listed as the pay range. What they pay for employees and what they pay for freelancers does not always line up directly, but it can be a really good indication of, are they willing to pay for certain creative skills? Did they hire a digital marketing person who had experience in ads recently and they paid pretty well for that employee role? Or have they hired freelancers in the past? You can look at, you can type things in like hiring a freelancer, freelance job, and then the company's name, and see if they've ever posted positions. You may be able to find some old cached website details. A lot of times these job positions get posted on third-party sites, and even though they may get deleted off of the company's site, they will still pop up even if the job post itself has expired on that third-party site. Again, that is really valuable information to know, because what if we open that and it says, yes, paying $20 per hour for a virtual assistant? That automatically tells me that's their perception of what a freelance virtual assistant costs. And I am not going to waste my time pitching them if that was posted relatively recently. So the short answer to all of this is that you don't know if a company has the money to pay you, because having the money isn't the issue. They may have the money, but don't want to allocate it to the services that you provide. They may feel they can get those services for cheaper. They may have been working with a freelancer who's been undercharging for years. So because of all of those issues, it's really important for you to do as much research as you can. And if you don't pull anything from your research, to just have a conversation with them. I love asking companies during a sales call their experience in working with previous freelancers. Because while I'm not specifically asking about what they paid previous freelancers or what they feel comfortable paying previous freelancers, it tells me a lot about the level of respect that they have for freelancers. If they tell me, oh, I've worked with someone for the last 5 years, but now this person is no longer in business and I'm looking for, someone else to partner with, I'm hearing all the right things, that you stuck with somebody who was okay with your rates for quite a while. And not only that, but you desire to have a long-term relationship with the freelancers that you work with. So those are good things to know as a freelancer. If they tell me, oh, it's always frustrating, we always feel like we pay so much and we still have to fix a ton of things when it comes back to us, that is a potential red flag that this may not be the right fit. So try to do all the research you can ahead of having the conversation with the company, and then also leave some room to validate or challenge those opinions that you have formed in an actual conversation with the company over the phone. I wish you the best of luck in getting all the rates that you deserve as a freelancer. And thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. I want to thank all of you who reach out as listeners and people who leave reviews on books like The Six-Figure Freelancer. It really means the world to get feedback when I have worked so hard to get some of this information out there. to other freelancers to help them grow their businesses faster, grow their businesses better. So I love hearing from readers, followers, and listeners. Always feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I walk the walk and talk the talk there. You can see what I am doing on LinkedIn to attract clients and really get established as a thought leader there. So you can catch me at linkedin.com/in/the freelance coach. I look forward to connecting.